I got an inbox message requesting to do this video, and I'll happily do it because it's quite an interesting subject. On that note, if anyone has any particular urge to hear me talk about any subject whatsoever, and I don't imagine there are too many people who do, but if you do, please do feel free to comment or drop me an inbox message. I aim to please, and I'll do a video discussing your topic of choice. But I got an inbox message saying, could I do a detailed video on heavyweight prospects? I rate heavyweight prospects who I think are about to take a loss. So I kind of had a bit of a think about it, put down a few names, and I've split it up into 3 parts. Heavyweight prospects I really like, heavyweight prospects who I think are massively overrated, and heavyweights who I'm yet to make a final decision on. Now, I've been quite broad in what I define as a prospect. Essentially, I'm dealing here with any fighter who isn't Vladimir Klitschko. I won't drone on too much about Tyson Fury. Regular subscribers to my channel will know that I'm a big fan of him, and I think he's got the potential to go all the way. If you want to hear my thoughts further on Tyson, check out some of my other videos, perhaps the post-fight video I did after the Derek Chisora match. But I'll focus here on heavyweights who are maybe one step below the top, one step below the Pulevs, the Povetkins, the Furies, the Klitschkos, the Hayes. And I'll start off with heavyweight prospects I like the look of. The first one I'll mention is a guy I've referred to several times on my channel. It's Jospeh Parker. The concerns about Jospeh Parker are that he's not quite got the size of the massive modern heavyweight, the Fury, the Klitschko. He's a slightly smaller man than them. He's also at times been slightly open defensively. We've seen him cut in fights, we've seen him dragged into wars, we've seen him prove quite hittable against a limited level of opposition. However, I really like the guy. And in his last performance against Beto Costa Jr., we saw the best Jospeh Parker I've seen. We must remember at 22 years of age, this guy has got some serious growth to do, both as a boxer and as a man. And given the performances he's already putting in, he's got real potential for the future. He's got decent boxing technical skills, but what I really like about him is his hand speed, his one-punch knockout power, his combination punching, his body work. There really is quite a lot to like about Jospeh Parker. As I say, perhaps he needs 2 or 3 fights to grow into himself a bit more, to work on some defensive frailties, but I really like the look of this guy. As I say, he's only 22 years old. When he gets to 24, 25, 26, he could be a real handful. Another one I like is Hughie Fury. Now, Hughie Fury's been out of the ring for quite some time, but I like him in one way similar to how I like Jospeh Parker. Hughie Fury, we've seen him fighting age 18, age 19, and he's a big man. He's even bigger than Jospeh Parker. I was actually standing next to him at the Fury Chisora weigh-in that I attended a few weeks back. I'm 6'4", and the guy was noticeably taller than me. You know, he's at least 6'5", 6'6". He's a real big guy. And when you're 18, when you're 19, it takes a long time to grow into yourself. A guy who's 5'6" may be a full-grown man at 19, but a guy who's 6'6" still has a lot of growing up to do into his frame, you know, physically, developing man strength, etc. Now, Hughie Fury has shown us excellent technical capabilities, good movement, good schooling, an excellent jab. I appreciate at times he hasn't been in the most entertaining fights. His style can be quite disciplined. I appreciate at times he hasn't looked like the hardest puncher in the sport. There are things for him to work on, and he certainly needs to go up against a higher level of opposition. But I think with Jospeh Parker, I'm looking at what he could be in 2 or 3 years' time. And I think what we've got to remember is Hughie Fury is actually 2 or so years behind Jospeh Parker in terms of his own development as a man. So I don't think it's inconceivable that in a year or two's time, Hughie Fury could be operating at a similar level to the current Jospeh Parker, and then we could expect to see similar progression as they get into their mid-20s. I really like Hughie Fury. As I say, perhaps not the most fan-friendly fighter in terms of his style, but real good technical schooling, really nice jab, and someone I think could be in some good fights coming forward. Another prospect I like, Dillian Whyte. This is the guy who beat Anthony Joshua in the amateurs. He's been sparring at Klitschko camps. I heard an interview on Bayloric TV where Klitschko trainer James Ali Basir said he really liked the look of Dillian Whyte. Whyte's just come back from a 2-year drugs ban. Before that, he was scheduled to face John McDermott for the English title. So that shows you the kind of level that Dillian Whyte's operating at. He's come back, he's had a few warm-up fights. I think he had 2 fights in 1 week, scored early knockouts in both. The guy clearly hits very hard. In hindsight, it may not have been the worst thing for him, his ban. He's still only 26 years old. He's still got maturing to do, and it's possibly not the worst thing out there that, you know, he was protected for 2 years from getting into big fights. Maybe a John McDermott fight would have come too early for him, but now age 26, having had an extra 2 years in the gym, I think the guy could go serious places. He's got power, he's got technique. Wouldn't surprise me to see him in a fight with Anthony Joshua. If he goes his own way, I'm sure he can forge a route to the British title. Now the other guy I like, and I appreciate he's operated at a much higher level than the 3 fighters I've already mentioned, but he's a guy who took a loss in his last fight. He's a guy who, you know, is on the comeback trail, is Mike Perez. I've been a fan of Mike Perez since Prize Fighter. I appreciate there are obvious negatives with Perez. He's got the frame, certainly in terms of his height. Well, he's a much smaller man than the sort of stereotypical heavyweight you get these days. The Lennox Lewises, the Klitschkos, the Furies, etc. He's a small guy. He also seems to lack discipline in training. He comes into fights overweight. He doesn't look the fittest of guys out there. There are negatives to Mike Perez. However, there is a lot to like about him. In my opinion, he schooled Bryant Jennings in the first half of their fight, and Bryant Jennings' superior fitness won him the fight, combined with debatable points being taken off Perez. For me, in terms of Perez's jab, in terms of Perez's head movement, his foot movement, his ring positioning, his amateur background, Perez really is a superb fighter. He's shown an iron chin in his fights with Magomed Abdusalamov, the fight that ended in tragic circumstances. He's shown, you know, maybe not the biggest puncher in the world, maybe not the biggest man in the world, maybe not got the best discipline, but in terms of his movement, his defensive capability, his positioning in the ring, his head movement, his jab, the guy has such refined technical skills. I really rate him, and I think he'd be a handful for any fighter over there. As I say, he lost the Bryant Jennings fight due to a debatable point being docked and to fading, but we're yet to see any man go in and dominate Perez in the early rounds of a fight when, you know, he's still got his stamina intact. If he can get that sorted, he could be a real player in the heavyweight division. As I say, he won the first half of the fight against Carlos Cam. He won the first half of the fight against Bryant Jennings. Those are 2 decent names in the division. I like Mike Perez. Let's hope he can sort out his discipline problems. So the 4 heavyweights to follow for me: Jospeh Parker, Hughie Fury, Mike Perez, Dillian Whyte. I'm going to talk a bit more about heavyweights that I'm on the fence with. One guy who lost as recently as 3 or 4 months ago, I was saying and forecasting will probably be the next big thing in the heavyweight division. Cuban Luis Ortiz. There are 2 concerns about Luis Ortiz. Number 1, he's in his late 30s now. Number 2, he's just tested positively or negatively, whatever it is, for anabolic steroids. He's likely to get a lengthy ban. He's likely to lose his position as mandatory for the WBA regular belt. He's likely to be inactive for some time. It'll be hard to see him coming back. It's also hard to know, if he has been on steroids, how much of an effect that has actually had on his performances. Will he be half the fighter without them? And we've seen that before with, at a lower level, Larry Olabamawai in the UK. He looked like a real prospect, came off the steroids, and now he's lost, 5 or 6 on the bounce. Could the same thing happen with Luis Ortiz? I like Luis Ortiz a lot from his last 2 or 3 fights, but I've got to say I'm on the fence. Namely because he's likely to get a long ban. By the time he's back, he's likely to be very old. And, we have to disregard all of his form if he's been on steroids, because it's hard to really assess how good he genuinely is. Lucas Browne, I'm on the fence with. Tall guy, powerful guy, but huge stamina problems. One-dimensional movement. Quite sort of Route 1 attack. If you're that big, if you're that strong, if you're that powerful, you can get to a certain level in the sport. Lucas Browne has done that. The question is, can he get to the next level? And that's something I'm still on the fence about. Is he too easy to hit? Is he too limited? Does he lack versatility? I'd love to see a Lucas Browne-Derek Chisora fight that was being talked about. I'd love to see a Lucas Browne-David Price fight that was being talked about. He needs to step it up in terms of level of opposition, because he's another guy in his mid to late 30s who's yet to be in the blockbuster fights. We've seen him beat Rudenko, Welliver, Richard Towers. We've seen him beat that sort of top 50 level of opposition. What we need to now see him is beating that top 20 level of opposition. Lucas Browne, I'm on the fence with. Odlanier Solis. I know I've mentioned he's the 3rd Cuban heavyweight I've mentioned already, but these Cuban heavyweights with the amateur background who defect, obviously they're technically superb. Obviously they've got the amateur pedigree. Solis at times looks very, very, very good, but we've seen him, due to lack of discipline, blowing up between fights, coming into the ring unfit. He looked absolutely terrible in the last fight against Tony Thompson, where Thompson was a very deserved winner, by the way, in my opinion. Solis, like Perez, like Luis Ortiz, if he comes to the ring in shape, if he stays busy, if he trains hard, he's got the potential to be at the very top of the division. Perez and Ortiz have given us cause for doubt. Odlanier Solis, the doubt is starting to become insurmountable. Talented. Hard to say whether we'll ever see him, hit the heights that he could have done. I believe his next fight's against Tony Thompson. That's a must-win fight. And until then, I'm on the fence. Finally, Eddie Chambers. He's a guy I like. Speed. Technical capability. Movement. He's showing more power since he's been with Peter Fury. The problem with Eddie Chambers is the level of opposition he's been in with in the last couple of, since he's joined the Furies, is so woeful. I like the look of the new Eddie Chambers. I want to start considering him again as a top 15 heavyweight. I want to start talking about him in terms of big fights in the future. But you can't really do that when he's fighting the likes of Dorian Darts and Carl Baker. He's fighting a really low level of opposition. Recently, he's probably been operating at a lower level of opposition even than Hughie Fury. It's difficult. I like Eddie Chambers. I think he adds something different to the heavyweight division. I think he's a different kind of fighter. Stylistically, he appeals to me. But I have to be on the fence with him because it's unclear how he's going to perform these days if he's in with a top 10 heavyweight. Let's hope Team Fury can deliver that for him in 2015. Heavyweights I don't like. So we've gone for the prospects I've like. Heavyweights I'm on the fence with: Ortiz, Brown, Solis, Chambers. There's actually one more heavyweight I'm on the fence with who I shouldn't forget to mention. Anthony Joshua. Clearly Joshua's looked very, very good against the level of opposition he's been in with. He's looked devastating. The reason I'm on the fence, hate to keep going on about it, is level of opposition. He's been in with such a low level of opposition that we haven't seen him even going into the middle rounds of the fight. We haven't seen how he reacts when he hits back. We haven't seen him how he deals with a jab, how he deals with someone with movement, how he deals with someone with defensive capability. We haven't seen other strings to his bow rather than just his power and his front foot assault. How will he cope if someone puts him on his back foot? How will he cope if someone can move and throw a jab? How will he cope when his punching power isn't enough just to get him through a fight and he's got to rely on technique and stamina? Now, you may say it's unfair that I've put the likes of Hughie Fury and Jospeh Parker as fighters I like when they've been in with a similar level of opposition to Anthony Joshua. But the difficulty is, because these guys have been in tough fights where they've struggled, we've seen different strings to their bow. We've seen how Parker reacts when he has to go the distance, how Hughie Fury reacts when he gets taken beyond the first few rounds. We've seen that these guys can win fights when they get hit back. We've seen that these guys can win fights when their power isn't enough to carry them through. With Joshua, I haven't seen that yet. We should learn a lot more when he faces Kevin Johnson. That's a good fight in my eyes. But Joshua's a heavyweight I'm on the fence with. Finally, heavyweight prospects I just don't rate. Christian Hamer. Look how limited Christian Hamer appeared to be against Beto Costa Jr. compared to Jospeh Parker. Hamer's a much more experienced, much more highly rated heavyweight than Jospeh Parker. And look at the job Parker did on Beto Costa Jr. compared to Hamer. Look how superior Kevin Johnson looked at times to Christian Hamer in their fight. I just can't have Christian Hamer as a serious top 10, or for that matter, a serious top 20 heavyweight. I don't care what the governing bodies say, what BoxRec say. For me, he's just not there. Derek Chisora. I mean, this is a guy who is so highly rated by the governing bodies, by the public. But the fact is, every single time he's stepped up to face someone in the top 15, he's lost. We know he's good enough to get a nod against the likes of Kevin Johnson, Malik Scott, Edmund Gerber. We know now that Chisora operates at that level. He's a solid top 25 man. But what he is not is a solid top 10 man. Fury, Klitschko, Hay, Helenius, I know that was debatable. Derek Chisora loses when he steps up to that level. That's not to say that there's a problem with being a solid top 25 guy, but I just can't buy into any of the chat about the new Derek Chisora and the fact that he's a threat to the world titles. Erkan Tepa, a heavyweight I've heard a few people mention on my videos. I've seen him fight Sprott, I've seen him fight Rogan. Clearly he's a big guy, clearly he can hit a bit. And against limited, older fighters, if he lands on you, he's got the power to knock you out. But for me, the guy is so static. His movement is non-existent. He's very, very one-dimensional. And I think he gets found out the first time he steps up in class. The first time he faces someone with hunger, athleticism, defence. He's just too plodding, too route one for me. And like Christian Hamer, like Derek Chisora, I think his rating on BoxRec, rating amongst the boxing community is ludicrous. I just think he's too limited. Finally, and perhaps most controversially, I want to discredit BoxRec's number 6 heavyweight, Ksar Glazkov. Yes, Glazkov has certain attributes. I know he's got amateur pedigree. I know he's got a really, really nice jab. But beyond that, I don't rate him. He clearly carries quite a powerful, snappy, spiteful jab. But apart from that, he's a light puncher. He's small at the weight. But beyond any of that, the reasons I don't like him has been his performances in the ring. Let me give two examples. Derek Rossi, Malik Scott. Both of those guys, in my opinion, did enough to get the nod over Glazkov. Yeah, Rossi, it's hard to even consider him a top 50 heavyweight. Malik Scott, borderline top 25. And yet these guys who've got a bit more experience, a bit of ring savvy, Malik Scott, who's got the movement, who's got the jab, are able to cause him all sorts of bother. For me, I know this sounds crazy, a guy like Jospeh Parker, a guy like Hughie Fury, a guy like Mike Perez destroys Saul Glazkov because Glazkov struggles against a technically minded fighter who can move, who can jab, who's got defensive attributes. For me, Glazkov, whilst he's got certain positives, just isn't going to cut it at the top level of the heavyweights. So there we are, that's my general overview. To recap, a fan of Jospeh Parker, a fan of Hughie Fury, a fan of Mike Perez and a fan of Dillian White. Unsure on Eddie Chambers, Odlanair Solis, Anthony Joshua, Lucas Brown, Luis Ortiz, and expecting the downfall of Christian Hamer, Derek Chisora, Ksar Glazkov and Erkan Tepe. I might review this video in 6 months' time, see how we're getting on. Let me know your thoughts, both on my selections, heavyweights you like, heavyweights that you think are going to lose soon. Thanks for watching.